What's up, guys? Welcome to the Metal Roofing Channel. Welcome to Q&A Mondays. I'm Thad Barnett. Here at Sheffield Metals, we always recommend getting multiple different bids for your project, no matter what the circumstances are, so that you can compare and contrast different contractors in your area. Today, we're gonna talk about how to actually compare those bids and not just talk about them. I've got real life quotes that we're gonna compare from two contractors out in the Western region. So I've got Jeff Hock from the Sheffield Technical Department to help me out. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Thad.
All right, so why is it so important to compare different contractors' bids? Let's start there before we jump into the actual quotes.
Well, it's just like anything else you're doing. I mean, number one, you're going to make a substantial investment in this roof, right? So you want to make sure you're getting the best possible price and the best possible quality. You know, those two don't always match up. You might be getting a high price and low quality. You might be getting a low price and low quality. You want to do your due diligence, just like everything else. More than likely, you go out and buy a car. You're probably not going to go to the lot and buy the first one you see. You're going to test drive them. You're going to compare them. You're going to go around maybe to other dealerships, see what kind of deals you can work out. It's the same thing with a metal roof. Again, substantial investments. You want to make sure that you're getting the best possible product at the fairest price possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we've got two real world quotes that we're going to be looking at today. These quotes were both created using a single roof takeoff of Adam's house that we've done in the past. It's about a 3,000 square foot up and over gable roof with a couple valleys. So pretty simple roof design, but we're actually going to look through and see what these two different contractors put in their bids and really explain what you should be thinking about, the process that you should be going through to think about these critically before you make any decisions for your home or building.
When you're getting multiple quotes, if you have different quotes that are substantially far apart, you want to start figuring out why that is. It could be labor's cheaper or more expensive with one. It could be the installation details that they're using in one versus another. It could be that they're not comparing apples to apples as far as the same product. Again, multiple reasons to get multiple quotes.
Gotcha. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so here's our two quotes, one on the left, one on the right. I will mention that these quotes right off the bat don't include labor. This is, material and accessories only. So when you're looking through these, check the labor line items and double check what those are saying as well. So let's look at these. Jeff, why don't you take me through and kind of where should I be starting when I'm looking at this quote?
So the first things I would look at just right off the bat is I'd start looking and seeing what's the same. So are we talking about the same panel? So the quote on the left, it's the SMI 450 panel. The quote on the right, again, it says the SMI 450 panel, which is our 1.5 inch snap block panel. So, okay, we know we're talking about the same panel profile. And quite honestly, the next thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the price. I'm going to see bottom line numbers. So the quote on the left is $15,294. Quote on the right is $10,905. So a little bit more than a $4,000 difference. So I'm looking at two quotes that are quoting the same panel. I got a $4,000 spread just in material. That might not be as far apart when we get, the labor numbers, but that's something to take into account. But with what we're doing right now, it's just materials. So we can start comparing why that is. We can start looking at the two different quotes, seeing the quantities, seeing what they're proposing being used, and we can start figuring out why those quotes are different. And this is basically where you start going down the line, item by item, and comparing, apples to apples.
You started with the panel and the price. Is there anything else with the actual material that we should be looking at?
All right, so we're going to compare the quote on the left to the quote on the right. First thing we're going to compare is the panels that are being offered. The quote on the left, the quantity is 3,044. I'm assuming that's square feet. The rate's $3.18. I'm assuming that's the price per square foot. And the amount is $9,679.92. The quote on the right, same panel, but the unit price is $2.68. The pieces, which I'm assuming is square feet, is 2,285 square feet, and the total cost is $6,123.80. So right there is the majority of the gap in our prices. It's a little over $3,000, and that is going to be a considerable amount of what the differences is. When we look at the quote on the right, it says standard color to be determined, ribs to be determined, and it does qualify that it is 24 gauge steel. The quote on the right doesn't talk about color, and it doesn't talk about gauge. I automatically think, number one, are we talking about the same panel? Are we talking about a painted panel? Are we talking about a bare galvalume panel? Are we talking about a 24 gauge panel or a 26 gauge panel? Because there is a substantial difference in the unit price. And can that be the difference between the two? Are we comparing 24 gauge to 26 gauge? Are we comparing painted to non-painted metal? So that's something I would definitely be asking my contractor about for the quote on the right, to make sure that we are getting the same material that we're looking for. The other difference is if the pieces and the quantity on the two different quotes are square footage, the square footage on the quote on the right is significantly less than the quote on the left. So why is there so much less material for the quote on the right versus the one on the left? Did they quote that job accurately? Is the quote on the left quoted too high? Is the quote on the left quoted too low? I don't want to pay for material that's not going to be used on my project, and I don't want to find out halfway through my project that they didn't buy enough material. I don't want to have surprise costs going on when I think my roof project's moving forward. So that's probably the biggest one on the whole difference of the quotes right there, is the type of panel being used and the amount being used makes up the majority of this price difference. So those are the conversations I would have clarifying that with my contractor who did the quote.
And it looks like there's, beyond the panel, there's two main categories of additional things that are on these quotes, and that's the trim and the accessories. So let's move on to the accessories portion and kind of compare those.
Yeah, correct. So starting with clips, the clip count for the quote on the left is 1,200, 24 cents a clip. The clip count for the quote on the right is 800. We'd have to break that down to see what that is per piece. But again, there is 2/3 the clips on the right versus the quote on the left. That could very well do with the substantial difference in the lower quantity of metal panels. So again, it has to do with the amount being quoted, as far as it goes back to the panel, right? It has to do with the amount of material being quoted. Why is it so much less? Or why is it so much more? Moving on, you have the screws. The 1-inch pancake screw ULP 3000. I assume that's going to be 2 per clip, and then whatever else they figure they need for trim. The quote for the screw on the right is 1.5 inches, so it's a 1/2 inch longer, and they have 2,000 quoted. So 1,000 less screws and a 1/2 inch longer. It's kind of weird, because I like the size of the screw on the left, and I like the type of screw on the right. I don't know why you would need 1.5 inch fastener for a standard plywood installation, which is what I'm assuming this is. And I don't like the ULPs on the quote on the left. So again, those are things I would be talking about. I like a pancake head type fastener, non-ULP, and I don't know why I would be using a 1.5 inch fastener when a 1 inch is more than sufficient. You're paying for a longer screw that you don't really need. So again, why are we different? Novaflex sealant, they're both using the same type sealant, which is easy to compare. 24 quantity on the quote on the left, and 12 on the right. So the quote on the left has double the amount of sealant. Why is that? It's $180 for the quote on the left. It's $128 for the quote on the right. Quote on the left's using double the amount of sealant, but it's not double the price versus the quote on the right. So it seems to be it's a little cheaper for the sealant on the left, but they're using twice as much. Do we need twice as much? What's going on there? Matte black rivets, 250 of them. Rivets on this one, 250 of them, so they're the same there. $27.50 for the quote on the left, $22 for the quote on the right. So a little bit of difference. That to me doesn't really matter much when it gets into nickel and diamond stuff. A couple bucks here, a couple bucks there isn't really a big deal breaker for me. Underlayment. So this is the difference for me. The underlayment on the left has 17 rolls of Ultra HT, whatever type of that is, and it has 17 rolls. The quote on the right has Ultra SA, which is the product that we recommend. But the biggest difference is quantity. You have seven rolls of the quote on the right, and you have 17 for the left. So more than likely, the quote on the left is using a 2 square roll. The quote on the right uses a 5 square roll. So I think amount of square footage wise, it's about the same. The cost is higher for the shark skin. It's a premium underlayment. It has a premium price. I'd clarify what type of underlayment they were using for the quote on the left and make sure it is on par or at least up to my expectations for my project before I just said okay. Because underlayment is a big one. It's a primary, secondary defense for your roof system. If you end up having a problem, the only thing stopping it from getting inside your building is the underlayment. So you want to make sure you're using the best underlayment that you can be. I don't see butyl tape quoted for the project on the right. While I probably wouldn't expect your typical homeowner to know this, that's a big red flag for me. Why aren't we using butyl tape in our installation details? Is that something that was just missed, or are we not planning on using butyl tape? Butyl tape gets used in a lot of our recommended installation details, so I'd be wondering why that's not on there. Paint pens are paint pens. I think anytime you order coil, you should have a paint pen delivered with it. If you have to touch up minor scratches on the job site, this is the most efficient way to do that. They have 2 in there, which is pretty standard. I don't see paint pens on the quote on the right either. Again, it's a small cost to add in, but I'd want to make sure my contractor had a way to touch up my paint system if I'm getting a painted material to have my job looking as good as possible when it's all said and done. Scratches happen. It's almost inevitable. You want to make sure you can take care of those scratches when they happen and take care of the premium product the way it should be. So I'd be asking to have some paint pens for the quote on the right. Now we can get into the trim pieces, and this is what they think they're going to actually need to put the trim on. We'll start with the eave trim. It's the top one on the quote on the left. They have 15 pieces. These pieces are all going to be in 10-foot lengths. So they have 15 on the quote on the left. They have 16 for the quote on the right. Okay, that's within reason to me. They might have an extra piece just in case something gets damaged. It doesn't slow the job down, which is perfectly fine. Now the cost difference, you have 15 pieces at $23.30 a piece. They have 16 pieces at $10.17 a piece. So it's significantly different pricing, and it does say 24 gauge. That's almost double if we're talking apples to apples. So why is one so much lower? Why is one so much higher? Are they doing a different style of eave detail that I don't know about for the quote on the left? They show the picture for the quote on the right, so I know what style it is. But why is there a big price gap there? For the rake detail, they have 12 pieces at $15.88. For the rake detail on the quote on the right, they have 13 pieces, again, at $10 a piece, so significantly cheaper. Why is that? Valley, they have 5 pieces, $76.81 per piece. Valley, they have 5 pieces at just under $30 per piece. Significantly lower. Why is that? Joggle cleats, which what you will need to install the Valley with. They have 10 pieces, which makes sense. It's double the amount of Valley, $3 a pop for the quote on the left. The joggle cleat for the quote on the right, 10 pieces, $4.58 a pop. For that, but again, it's double the amount of the Valley, which is good. This is the first one that has been more than the quote on the left, $2 more per piece. Starter clip, they have 12 pieces at $13.21. I don't see that on the quote on the right. technically per our details, you do need that. If that's missing from the quote on the right, as if it was installed per our recommended details. So again, this kind of goes back to, you might not know all this information, but we do have our recommended details online. You can see the different parts and pieces in there to be able to ask these questions, or at least use it to compare to when you get different quotes. Ridge cap, they have at 11 pieces, $35 a pop. Bridge cap, they have 11 pieces at $15 a pop. For the quote on the right, again, significantly cheaper. Is it a narrower ridge cap maybe? Are they using a smaller ridge cap than the one on the left? I don't know. The one on the left doesn't give sizes. I'm trying to figure out reasons why it would be so much more expensive for the quote on the left. Maybe they're using more material. I'm not really sure. That's what I would get clarified. The last thing is Z closures, 22 pieces of Z closure, which makes sense because you have 11 pieces of ridge cap. You need a Z closure on each side. Again, the Z closure on the quote on the right is 22 pieces, $14 versus $10.59. So they're a little bit higher on their Z closure price. Now, I will say the Z closure on the right is not per our recommended details. This is a type of CZ closure. I don't recommend that detail. It's not a detail we support. So it's probably more expensive because it's definitely using more material. But it's not per our recommended installation details. That, again, is why it's always good to know what details the manufacturer recommends. So when you get things like this, you can talk about it with your contractor and make sure they're installing it per the manufacturer's recommendations. That's pretty much it as far as comparing the quotes side by side. Again, there's no labor involved as quoted, so maybe those numbers do even out a little bit. I would definitely be asking about the material for the quote on the right. I'd definitely be asking about the amount of material. Is there going to be enough of it? Just because it's lower than the quote on the left. Pieces for the trim is really what makes up the remaining amount that I could tell between the two quotes. The fabrication prices for the quote on the left is, substantially higher in some cases, sometimes double. For the quote on the right, the ones that were higher were a couple dollars higher. It wasn't very significant. So I'd be asking about that as well.
And I think one thing that to pay attention to is this fine print down here as well. There's a couple things that's important to note. So can we talk about these for a second?
Yeah, so both of them say oil canning is not a cause for rejection, and that's true. Oil canning is an aesthetic issue. It's not a performance issue. Your roof isn't going to fail for uplifts or leak solely because of oil canning. Now, do we want to try to minimize as much oil canning as possible? Absolutely. But at the same time, if there is a little bit of oil canning, which is inherent to light gauge metal roofing, it shouldn't be a cause to reject the installation. Price subject to change. With prices based on the steel market. So as the steel market goes up, prices are going to go up. That's why quotes are only good for so long. Both of these quotes are good for 30 days. That's pretty standard. Now, the quote on the left does have some things as far as no returns on custom orders. I would imagine anything on this quote is probably a custom order other than accessories. So once a panel's made, you own that panel. 25% restock fee on all stock items. That would probably be your clips, fasteners, things like that. And then they're going to charge you a storage fee if it ends up taking longer for you to take delivery of this material, which is, again, pretty standard for the quote on the left. The quote on the right doesn't really get into as much detail. They talk about all flashings must be ordered in 10-foot quantities. So basically, if you run 2 feet short of material on one of your pieces of trim, you're buying a 10-foot piece. Again, that's not out of the ordinary. That's pretty standard. The one thing I would have liked to see on each of these quotes, and maybe it's in the installation portion, or the labor portion when they add that in, is especially on re-roof projects, if it's a wood decking, You end up tearing off my roof. We end up seeing that there's bad plywood down. I obviously am going to want that plywood repaired before we put a brand new metal roof on it. I'd like to know if there's any of that included in my quote, and if there is, how much, and if there isn't, or if we go over what's included, how much per piece of plywood would I be looking at if there is a potential issue with the decking that I have. That way, one, we're both on the same page of what we agreed to up front. And I have kind of a worst case scenario. If I already have maybe an idea of that my decking might not be that great, I could kind of, plan for that budgeted in there before I move forward.
So I see really three main things to pay attention to. The first thing is education, understanding the type of system, the type of products that should be going down on your roof. Talking to your contractor, your supplier, looking online for resources, videos like this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is looking for inconsistencies between the different quotes. If something's different, make sure you understand why. And that's the third thing, is ask those questions so that your contractors can clarify and answer. You'll be set up so much better when it comes to purchasing your roof when you have those comparisons and those questions answered.
Most people that are doing this have a limited amount of knowledge when it comes to metal roofing, right? It's not something they do every day. It's not something they want to do every day. They want to find a contractor that they can trust. They want to get a fair price, and they want to get a good installation. So you can't be afraid to ask questions, clarifying questions to your contractor. And these are all things that they should be able to answer easily, right? It's not like you're asking anything that they shouldn't already know the answer to. So that's number one. Number two, again, when it goes back to installation details, any manufacturer is going to have the installation details they recommend. Well, they recommend them for a reason. So I would even say, before you start asking for quotes, I would let them know up front, these are the installation details that I want to have used on my project. So you can kind of avoid this down the line. They already know what details you want to use. They can quote them right off the bat, right? Maybe save you the hassle of having to go through some of that back and forth. And then again, like you said, ask questions. If there's something that doesn't sound right, doesn't seem right, the internet's a dangerous place, but it's filled with a lot of great information. You can start your research there, and if you're still getting conflicting information, there's manufacturers that support that you can reach out to get those questions answered. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but it is a significant investment. The roof does protect everything in your house. You want to make sure you're involved with the process and that you're getting what you need and, more importantly, expect.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for the information, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Thad.
If you have any questions, please comment down below. We'd love to answer them. Visit SheffieldMetals.com. We've got a free guide, 27 questions to ask your contractor. It's a guide that we put together to make sure that you're covering your bases when it comes to all this different information. Thanks very much. Subscribe here to the Metal Roofing channel. As always, I'm Thad Barnett. We'll catch you next time.